possum lies on its side in the dirt. Its eyes are open, its tongue hangs out. Its body has gone cold. Its breathing has dropped to almost nothing, and its glands are leaking a smell, the precise, unmistakable smell of a corpse that's been rotting for days. A coyote approaches, lowers its head, sniffs once, and walks away. The possum isn't dead, it's performing. And the performance only works for one reason. Somewhere in that coyote's mind sits an idea of what dead is supposed to look like, and the possum is feeding it exactly that. Which leaves us with a question almost nobody stops to ask. Do animals understand death? Not do they react to it, not do they grieve, do they actually understand it? Most of us assume the answer is no, and we assume it for a specific reason. When we picture understanding death, we picture the human version, the heavy one. Knowing you will die one day, lying awake at 3 in the morning, doing the math on your own ending, building religions and graveyards and entire philosophies just to manage the dread. That's a very particular, very human relationship with mortality. And if that's the bar, then no animal clears it. But a philosopher named Susanna Monceau has spent years arguing that we've been asking the question wrong. In her book, Playing Possum, she points out that we keep making two mistakes. The first she calls intellectual anthropocentrism, the assumption that the only way to understand death is the complicated human way. The second is emotional anthropocentrism, the assumption that the only reactions to death worth noticing are the ones that look like human grief. Strip both of those away, and a different question appears. Not do animals understand death the way we do, but what is the simplest possible version of understanding death? And do animals have that one? So, what's the simplest version? Monceau borrows from child psychologists who break a full understanding of death into roughly 7 separate pieces. Knowing death is universal, knowing it's inevitable, knowing what causes it. A grown adult holds all of them. But Monceau argues that to understand death at the most basic level, you only need 2. The first is non-functionality, grasping that a dead body no longer does the things a living one does. It doesn't move, it doesn't eat, it doesn't answer. The second is irreversibility, grasping that this is permanent, that the thing lying there isn't asleep, isn't stunned, isn't coming back. That's it. No concept of eternity, no existential dread, just a quiet update to an expectation. This one used to do things and now it never will again. Monceau's claim is that this minimal concept is far easier to acquire than we assumed. And once you go looking for it with the right eyes, you start finding it in places you'd never expect. But here's where it gets strange. Go back to the possum. For playing dead to work as a survival strategy at all, the predator has to hold an expectation that can be exploited. A coyote that lunges at anything that moves and ignores anything that doesn't is a coyote running on a rule about life and death. And the possum is hacking that rule. But predators aren't fixed. Many of them learn. A predator that's been fooled once, that walked away from a corpse which suddenly sprang back to life, learns something uncomfortable. Not moving doesn't always mean safe to ignore. In other words, it revises its own idea of what dead really means. The faker and the hunter are locked in a strange, silent argument about a single concept, and both of them, in their own way, are reasoning about it. That's a long way from the dread-soaked human version. But by Monceau's definition, it's still an understanding of a death, and it gets sharper when we stop looking at predators and prey and start looking at animals reacting to their own. In 2015, 2 biologists at the University of Washington, Kylie Swift and John Marsluff, ran one of the most revealing experiments in this entire field. They wanted to know what crows actually do around their dead. So they set up feeding sites across more than 100 locations, waited for the local crows to settle in, then sent in a volunteer wearing a mask and holding a stuffed, dead crow. The reaction was instant and loud. The crows mobbed. They screamed alarm calls. They stopped feeding, and then they remembered. Weeks later, that same masked face, now empty-handed, still set off the alarm. Crows that had never witnessed the original scene picked the fear up from the others and avoided the mask too. The aversion to the spot where they'd seen the body could linger for around 72 hours after the body was gone. Then the researchers swapped the dead crow for a dead pigeon, and the response collapsed. It wasn't death in general that gripped them, it was their dead. Here's what makes this land harder. A crow's brain is about the size of a human thumb. When researchers looked at what was firing during these encounters, it was the region that lines up with our own decision-making cortex. These birds weren't simply spooked, they were processing, gathering information. learning a danger, carrying that lesson forward. A funeral, it turns out, might also be a classroom. But is any of that the same as understanding death? Here, the honest answer gets uncomfortable. Because the crow story has a clean explanation that needs no concept of death at all. The crows might simply be treating a dead body as a warning sign. Something killed this crow here, so avoid this place. That's threat assessment, not comprehension. And that same skeptical lens can be turned on almost every famous case. Elephants returning to the bones of their herd, running their trunks slowly over the skulls and the tusks of animals dead for years. Whale mothers carrying a dead calf for days, sometimes weeks, refusing to let it sink. Chimpanzee mothers who keep a dead infant so long that the small body dries and mummifies in the sun, still carrying it, still grooming it. Every one of these is hard to watch, and every one of these has a deflating explanation waiting in the wings. Maybe the elephant is only curious. Maybe the whale's maternal drive simply hasn't switched off. Maybe the chimpanzee understands nothing at all. She's just running a program she can't stop. This is the skeptic's case, and it deserves to be taken seriously. Here's the trouble with the skeptic's case. It explains each example beautifully in isolation. It struggles with the pattern. The crows didn't react to a dead pigeon the way they reacted to a dead crow. The responses are specific. They're calibrated. Animals across wildly distant branches of the tree of life, birds, primates, elephants, dolphins, even insects, keep converging on the same thing, treating the dead differently from the living, often differently from a sleeping companion, and in some cases, updating that behavior over time, exactly the way an expectation updates when it runs into new information. You can call any single instance instinct. It's much harder to call the whole forest instinct. So the most honest position isn't animals grieve just like us, and it isn't animals understand nothing. It's the uncomfortable middle. That the minimal concept of death, the quiet recognition that a body has stopped and won't start again, may be far more widespread in the animal world than we ever wanted to admit. There's one observation I can't stop thinking about. At a sanctuary in Zambia, a group of chimpanzees gathered around the body of a young male who had just died. After a long stillness, an older female approached him. She picked out a firm stem of grass. She sat down beside the body, opened the dead chimp's mouth, and began, carefully, deliberately, to clean his teeth with the stem. The same intimate, focused grooming chimpanzees give to the living. No one taught her this. There was nothing to gain. The young male would never know. And we have no way of knowing what, if anything, was moving through her as she did it. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was confusion. Maybe it was care aimed at someone she hadn't yet fully understood was gone. What we can say is this: she treated his death as something that called for a response, not a reflex, a response. So where does that leave us? Right back with the possum, lying in the dirt, performing a death it understands well enough to imitate, for a predator that understands it well enough to be fooled. Two animals, neither of them human, both reasoning about the one thing we were so certain belonged to us alone. We told ourselves understanding death was the line, the thing that set human minds apart, that quietly justified treating every other mind as a lesser kind of light. But the line was never as clean as we needed it to be. The recognition that a living thing can simply stop and not come back has probably been drifting through forests and oceans and skies for as long as there have been brains to hold it. We just weren't looking, or maybe we were looking, and we called it instinct because the alternative asked too much of us. The next time you decide an animal can't possibly understand what death is, it might be worth remembering they were reckoning with death long before we carved the first tombstone. They just never needed the words.